Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session. My name is Jeremy, and I'm a representative from EHN Canada. We are a nationwide network of treatment centers for addiction, trauma, and mental health. We have facilities located in Nanaimo, British Columbia, Calgary, Alberta, Toronto and Peterborough, Ontario, Montreal, Quebec, and Annapolis County, Nova Scotia. We offer high-quality inpatient, outpatient, and online treatment programs. For more information, please visit our website at ehncanada.com. Just for some housekeeping items, everyone is on mute and cameras are off for today's webinar, but please feel free to utilize the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to submit your question for our speaker. We will try to get to as many as possible throughout the presentation. Today's webinar is in fact being recorded, and we will be sending out a follow-up email next week that will include the link to the video, any additional resources mentioned throughout today's presentation, and a copy of your CEU certificate. Now to get to today's topic, seeking treatment for a loved one, how to navigate the conversation. It is my pleasure to introduce Lynn McLaughlin. Lynn's mission is to lead and empower people to make conscious and positive choices when faced with a crisis. Lynn gives people the opportunity to share their own voices through her podcast, Taking the Helm, through her own writing, or by helping aspiring authors publish their own books. Lynn's professional speaking experiences have been local, provincial, and international as she leads us in tackling our barriers so that we can move forward to new and exciting possibilities. Dedicated to community causes, Lynn is a member of 100 Women Who Care, Windsor, Essex, is a Rotarian, and works tirelessly to support the goals of the Brain Tumor Foundation of Canada. Lynn has recently joined the National Advocacy Committee as a community member. She strives to meet each new personal goal and has completed her first Detroit International Half Marathon in November 2019. Lynn McLaughlin was the Superintendent of Education with the Greater Essex County District School Board, retiring in September 2018. She is well versed in all areas of special education, school, and board operations. Skilled in conflict management, Lynn also served in 3 different school boards as a principal, vice principal, teacher, and educational consultant. In addition to her business, Lynn continues to be active in education, teaching future educational assistants at her local college. Although she would say it was a lifetime ago, Lynn retired as the executive officer of HMCS Provost after 13 years in the Canadian Forces Naval Reserve. She was one of a growing number of women moving into executive roles at the time. Please help me welcome Lynn McLaughlin.
Hi, Jeremy. I didn't expect you to read that entire intro.
How could I leave anything out? It was also like perfectly encompassing of you, so I had to.
Well, thank you very much. I'm
Of
humbled.
course. Yeah, no, we're happy to have you today and to get your expertise about everything. So thank you for joining.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. It's just incredible to me watching through the chat right across Canada. Amazing.
Yeah,
Hello from coast to coast.
I was going to say we even have some representation in Lebanon, I saw. So that's great.
Oh,
We're
wonderful.
international now, which is awesome. So if we kind of want to get into things, we can talk just briefly about like mental health and addictions and kind of what sparked your interest or your involvement within the mental health and addictions realm.
Oh, okay. Sure. I actually think of it as 3 different tentacles, shall we say, when I get into what I've been doing really passionately for the last few years. And the first one was in my role as an educator, and mental health, mental illness. The number of our students that are struggling was really something that was growing and growing in the last 5 years of my career. I would say specifically anxiousness and more so anxiety to the point that it became debilitating for our students and even some of our parents as well, that it affected their future. They were only able to come to school for part of a day or not able to come to school at all or having to go to day treatment programs. So we were constantly changing and shifting and saying, what are we going to do differently here, because the needs are different. So, hiring child youth workers, training them, having safe people in the schools, those kinds of things more of a reactive, unfortunately, when I think back on it now. We were providing the supports and trying to do the proactive work. And I guess what was really telling to me, and we have many clinicians and all kinds of people of various backgrounds here, when we have day treatment programs for 5-year-olds, 5-year-olds, really, and there's a whole bunch of complicating factors that contribute to that. But really, we need to change things up and do some things differently. So that was a huge part of it. And then, as a group of my friends and my family, as our children were going into their late teens, early 20s, we were having a lot of experiences as caregivers where we just didn't know what to do for each other, with each other, or for our children. You don't welcome a child into the world and hold them in your arms as a baby and ever think that they're going to have a mental health crisis in their lives, So, grappling with what to do and how do we solve this and how are we there for each other? And I think back to that time, and we weren't. We didn't talk about it openly for a lot of reasons. Maybe, Jeremy, we can look at my perspective about that. And then the biggest and the most important one, of course, just because it's my own daughter. So 3 years ago was HE double toothpick, because I don't know if I can say that word, for our family. She's doing remarkably well today, but there were 2 years when she moved away to university in her second year that we thought repeatedly we were going to lose her. So, yeah. Okay. That's basically why I do the work that I do now. After she was doing well, she wasn't in a position. My daughter has spoken. She speaks openly to a degree about what she experienced. I wrote a book. She helped me edit the book. She gave input. But I'm very cautious when I speak in forums such as this, is that her voice is her voice, and I can speak as a caregiver. And when I use the word caregiver, I think all of us on this webinar can connect. You're a caregiver to a spouse, a sister, a brother, a niece, a nephew, a child, a parent, whatever it is. When you're in that role, it's a very precarious and frightening place to be. So once we were through it and she was doing okay, and I say okay because there's always going to be ups and there's always going to be downs. We know that. We expect that. I went back and said, why wasn't I talking to people at this time? Why wasn't I? And that whole reflection about, is it stigma? Is it judgment? Is the fear of this, the fear of that? And we got to stop all that. And what you're doing at EHN and many networks across our country and around the world, we're doing that. We're moving forward. But I needed to be part of that voice. So in a nutshell, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think destigmatizing the conversation is a great step to hopefully get there. And we have a comment in the chat saying, thank you for sharing, Lynn. So many parents are living through this alone and don't know what to do. So I think like you utilizing your voice and speaking openly through the caregiver lens is so important and integral. And if you haven't checked out the book, Jackson, it's excellent. It's very well written. And it's a very easy read, honestly. I'm not a huge reader myself, and I went through it in a day. And it was very eye-opening to the experience, where I feel like these types of webinars tend to focus a lot on the patient perspective, which is very important. But this type of webinar, I really wanted to have the caregiver perspective, because it can be so taxing and just so people were saying, and you mentioned too, it's uncharted territory, right? Where you don't know how to navigate the conversation. You don't know if you're going through it alone. You don't know if there's so many different variables that you don't foresee coming. And you mentioned too, when you hold your child the first time, you're not thinking, okay, when's the mental health crisis going to come? Because that's not the thought, right? It's just not what you think.
It's so very true. And I just want to talk about the book Jackson, because it is fictional, but it's based on real life experiences. And I've been asked a few times, why is it fictional? And I think when I did that, I was in the protective mode, mom, the protector, because I'm well aware, and everyone on this call is well aware, as much as we fight the stigma, it's still out there. And the last thing I wanted for my daughter was her to be labeled and have some employers, not going to hire that person because of. But I interviewed many caregivers, many people in the caregiver role, and formulated the mother named June. And I also spoke to many people who were struggling, like my daughter was, and that formulated the character of Jackson. So everything in the book actually happened, but it happened to a variety of different people who then came together to create those two main characters. So yeah.
Of course. Yeah. And then everybody in the chat or in the question box asking about the book title or resource specifically, I will include it in
Sure.
our follow-up email, of course. And then
Eh,
I have my copy. So we
Yeah.
both have our copies here. But yeah, I will for sure include that as the follow-up resource too. So it's a great book,
And
like
you
I
know,
said.
if I may, I just want to share
Mhm.
something that happened 2 weeks ago because it isn't really. I mean, the book is generating conversations, and that's okay. But I was invited to a book talk with a group of foster parents who are children's aids. They have children's aids wards in their care. And by the end of the phone call, I mean, things in the book, everybody resonated with them. But by the end of the phone call or the Zoom call, the Zoom meeting, one of the parents exposed her vulnerability about what she was going through as a caregiver, and there was a wraparound network of support. And you know, as an author and my goals and everything I was trying to do, that was the cat's meow. That was like, this is what it's all about. I didn't even need to be there for that to happen, but I was so blessed to be, because now that person has people that she feels she can trust and speak to, and that's more than important, I think. So
Of course. Yeah. Creating that support network is second to none, especially in this type of circumstance. So I'm glad that was created for her. And then we just have some other comments too, just saying hearing from families who have come out on the other side is inspiring for us all. And then supporting families and caregivers who have loved ones who struggle, as the struggle is not individual. Thank you so much, Lynn.
very true.
So, and then just discussing different, like how we live in a world of labels and judgment and how it's hard to kind of like persevere through that. And that's oftentimes why people don't discuss their mental health openly, right? Because it's not as destigmatized as a broken arm, where
Very
that's
true.
often the example and the like equated where you would go to your employer and say, well, I have this health risk or I have this like thing that's keeping me from doing my job, like physically. But it's such a different conversation, unfortunately, to discuss it with mental health when we try to provide forums like this to kind of um, create different avenues in which you can destigmatize the conversation on both the employer and the employee end. So that's why we do what we do, right?
I much and very much appreciated.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. So I guess what would be kind of some tips or different approaches you would provide to someone if they're considering discussing mental health or addiction struggles with someone as a caregiver?
Yeah, that's wow. That's a really complex. So I'll put my caregiver hat on, and
Hmm.
the first thing I will say is close your mouth and listen. That was the biggest challenge I had, and oh, I had to go through a whole process, Jeremy, and everyone else who's listening, from digging deep into my own past and why I behave the way I do and why I'm such a control freak person. And because of that history in me and something that's intrinsic in me, I really made my daughter's recovery more challenging than it needed to be, or even her taking the first step, because I wanted her to do cognitive behavior therapy. And that's what I wanted her to do, period.
Hmm.
So she had wanted no part of it. Sure, she tried a couple of sessions. She didn't, she, so if I go back to your question, if I could go back in time and say, what would I do differently as a caregiver? Because when someone starts to speak to you about this, that's a huge step in itself, because it takes such a level of trust, right? And we have
Hmm.
people, we have people who are watching and listening yes, that's absolutely true. You're not going to disclose something so personal to someone that you don't trust. So the fact that, whatever that person is, whoever that person is in your life, is speaking to you about it, that first step, the worst thing we can do is say, why don't you, why don't you, why don't you, why don't you? And I mean, it wasn't that blunt. It wasn't that bad. But certainly I was the mother trying to protect my child and saying, I know what's best, and this is what you should do. So I would go back and say, shut up, honestly, shut
Hmm.
up and listen. And so now we talk about this openly, and we were a couple of years ago when things were starting to come around the other side. There was a narcissistic relationship, and what I wanted to do to that man. I won't tell you what my husband wanted to do to that man. But, removing ourselves from that, even though she was getting text messages and from fake numbers in the United States and all kinds of stuff, there's a point where you have to learn what the line is and what line not to cross. And I feel like I'm going all over the place. So let's go back to listening. So if I had listened to her back then, because she didn't know, she had no idea. She was in the depths of despair where the way she described it was, I can't get out of bed because I don't want to, because nothing matters. And I couldn't imagine that. How can nothing matter to such a beautiful young woman who has such a future ahead of her, so intelligent and driven? And I go back to, wow, what do you mean? Okay, forget about the judgment, trying to understand. That's what she was communicating in that moment. And I should have listened and asked questions and maybe helped her make the first step to just sit up on the side of the bed or have a sip of tea or a glass of water or come and join us in the kitchen, as opposed to saying, you need to do cognitive behavioral therapy, or how about we take you to the crisis center, or all those kinds of things. So listening is the hugest thing, and taking yourself out of it and putting them in the forefront. Because I think in that time I had to save her. Like, this just isn't happening. There's just no way. And my husband and I saw things differently. That's another piece, because there's conflict that comes with that too, when there's other people involved. He was more of the, she needs to figure it out. She needs to figure it out. And I was the total opposite extreme of, no way am I sitting back and watching her do the things that she's doing every day. And back then she was living at university. And I got to the point, I'm just looking for my phone, which is on silent, just to demonstrate, but you get it. I was creeping. She hasn't posted anything on social media. So I would send an innocuous question like, hi, honey, I can't get into my Instagram account. Can you help me? Just to see if I got a reply. Mm-hmm. If I got a text message, I would literally panic before, I opened it up and looked at it, or a telephone call. What's happening on the other end? I'm shaking right now, even thinking when I go back to those times, because you get to the place as a caregiver when you behaved the way I did and lived the way I did. And a roller coaster is it's an understatement. You are high, you're low, you're scared, you're terrified. And you become so debilitated yourself that you can't function. You're not sleeping. You're not eating properly. You're not getting exercise the way you are. And we shouldn't be waiting until that hits us in the head to say, hold on, this is beyond what I even know anything about, and start to look for help. So if I remember your question, remember I'm a brain tumor survivor too, okay?
Yes. Yeah, no problem.
If I remember your question properly, it's listening, being aware of yourself as a caregiver, because the old cliche, you can't do anything if your cup is empty. You got nothing left to give. And then reflecting reflecting isn't the word. I went to counseling. I took meditation, and I'm terrible at meditation. I walk for meditation, but the meditation course helped me to dig down and to understand why I was behaving the way I was, as well as, trying to slow down and quiet the mind and all those kinds of things. But that journey to getting to the point where I could actually say out loud, it doesn't matter how much love and hope you give. It doesn't matter if you're the first contact on the safety plan. You can't save her. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah, it's heavy.
That's
for
heavy.
Sure. Yeah, it's especially from like a parental, like caregiver point of view. I can only imagine that type of hopelessness, in that sense, where you're just like, I don't know what I can do. But it's like you said, just being there as ears to listen, I think is so important. And you've said it too throughout this, and we say it often too throughout treatment, is that it's dependent on the individual to want to have that care and to like actively seek that out. And the huge first step was like your daughter coming forward and discussing it with you. Mm-hmm. So that it wasn't at the point where she felt hopeless and when she wasn't able to talk to anybody, that she was able to kind of come forward with that, which is great. Mm-hmm. And that obviously speaks to like the environment in which you created that was so safe and welcoming for her to feel open and like welcomed enough to do that. Right. So I think that's important too, is just that's an ongoing thing too. It's just creating a great environment for your child, which obviously you did, but to create that like listening atmosphere too is so important.
Well, thank you, but there isn't anybody who lived in my house at that time who you can't set you have a sense of that anxiety and that fear. So even though you try to keep the home calm when you're worried about opening the door and what you're going to find on the other side, because there was a period of time where she did move back home. We did have her back home for several months and trying to provide that stable environment while she ditched the narcissistic boyfriend, and things started to come around and she discovered her own way. And if I go back to listening during that time, Jeremy, I think it would have been a less of a it's not combative, that's too extreme, but of a, what's the word I want? Less of a conflict environment, I'll say. If I had been listening, and maybe my husband was more correct then, I think we should have been in the middle, and we did find our way through the counseling to get through the middle, that cognitive behavior therapy was not the answer for her. And long story short, and this is a part in the book that is true, she did make an attempt on her life, and we were in Florida. And Baker's Law in Florida is forced 72 hours hold. She was put in a behavioral clinic, and that was a huge change for her because she saw how very, very, very ill people who were there were, and thought and said to herself, and she shared that this is not the way I want to be in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. And that was a change agent. Even though she went back to the boyfriend for a few months, I think that was a big part. But for her, she always said, and I hear this now, she could never connect with the counselor. She felt as though she was a guinea pig. She felt as though they've never walked in my shoes. They can't understand me. They ask me these preconceived questions, and I know what the reasons for the questions are, but she got confrontational about it. And she did try a few therapists, and it just didn't work. So for her, what ended up working in the end is identifying for herself through her own reading, through listening to music, actually, what her triggers were, and how understanding what they're going to be, and if I'm going to be faced with this trigger, these are the responses that I can have. That's very similar to what our clinicians, a very simplistic way of saying what our clinicians would say about CBT or any types of different therapy. But she worked through that herself. I still don't agree with the choices. I still don't agree, but I did shut up. Walking in nature, cycling in nature. She became a fitness guru. She's doing not taekwondo, jiu-jitsu and boxing. And that is how she has found herself to be grounded. And she's supporting other people who are going through challenges herself. So it wasn't the answer Lynn thought it should be. I had to give her the support and the love, we all did, to find her own way. Even though I still disagree, even though I wish she would still do things differently, even though today I see signs of she's going back to that external reinforcement place where she's looking to feel good and pulling things in as opposed to doing the work herself, I shut up. I ask questions, but I shut up. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I call myself Squirrel, just everybody so you know. I do the squirrel thing. So
No, you're very much on topic. Like, don't worry.
okay.
Everyone's been in the chat box saying that the resources are great and the like examples you've been giving are excellent. So very much on topic. Don't worry.
Okay.
And then we have a question from the audience. So how do you find the midpoint where you are helping and protecting your child or loved one, but also not enabling them and preventing them from moving forward or getting healthier?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's a big question.
And that's different for every single person in every single circumstance. But um, so I just want to flip to this piece because this is very helpful that I wrote, and it's not coming clearly to mind, but it was about establishing boundaries. And who here knows what should be a boundary for someone who just attempted to take their life? And a very, very dear friend who's a mental health practitioner said to me, because we think about tough love, right? Wow, that's a whole other kettle of fish. And he said, do not tell her you're not letting her back in the house unless you're going to stick with that. That's an absolute statement. So Lynn, if she goes back into the hospital, are you going to tell her that your door is closed to her? There's no way. That was not going to happen. So we we were able to talk about that and say that's a boundary. The whole thing about not being I had to stop creeping. I didn't say stop. I shouldn't say stop creeping. I had to set a boundary to say I would creep once a day to start. Right? Okay, let's say more like 5 times a day to start because it was that bad, and then slowly wean yourself off. I would go. I went out for the first time with friends in a long time, and I left my phone on mute in silence for 3 hours, and I was so proud of myself for that very very first step. I learned to validate, and I can't believe I wasn't doing this naturally as an educator for all my years. Positive reinforcement, positive reinforcement. I was so stuck on the why is she doing that, as opposed to positively reinforcing the things that she was doing well, those baby little steps that were coming through. So I'm just trying to help you find a middle road here. I can't tell you what your middle road is going to be. And the yelling, because of course volatility comes with it. We set the boundary, we will not be yelled at. So when something was happening and she was going to that extreme, we would say, I can see that you're upset right now. This is not a good time to talk about this. Let's revisit it later today. So we didn't take it up through the roof. We kept it low and gave her time to regroup. And I needed time to regroup too, because I would have just, and then mindfulness. So when the calls came upset, modeling the deep breathing, modeling the mindfulness, asking questions as opposed to giving solutions, which was really interesting for me because when I reflect back on how I was as a parent. Now, my daughter was a sick child. I mean, part of this, I think, goes all back to it. She had traumatic experiences in hospitals, repeated hospital visits. And I think we got in the mindset of when she called, we ran. Right? When you have a 3-month-old baby on a ventilator, you run, you respond, as opposed to asking the questions and leading them through. It was help, help, help. The last thing is expecting lows. Just know that if things are going well, celebrate them. They're wonderful, but there's going to be a low. And that's just part of what comes with I'll say a formal mental illness, but it comes with all of us in some degrees with our own mental health. Yeah, and then we watched articles, we watched some videos just to try to find for us. So whoever asked the question, whatever your middle ground is going to be based on what boundaries you can set for yourselves as a family. And maybe tough love is something you can do, or maybe it's become so extreme that that's something you have to do. I don't know. So I can't really answer that question. Maybe those thinking points can help, but it's the toughest thing I've ever done in my whole life is get to that place where, okay, we all have to get through this. We have to get her through this, but we can't do it when we're on the floor ourselves. So
For sure. Yeah, no, I think those like talking points, as you mentioned, are great, and they're broad enough to be circumstantial, right? Like you're able to integrate them into your personal circumstance and reevaluate what's going to work for you, because as we both know, and everybody on this call knows, everyone's mental health journey is vastly different,
right.
in that it's completely individual based. So there's no like key answer, which would make it a lot easier.
Yeah, it
But
sure would.
yeah,
Give
if
us a
there was
manual.
if there was a templated approach for mental health, I'm assuming that it wouldn't be as large of an issue, or at least would be able to be dealt with a lot more in an effective manner, but that's just not the case. So realizing that, I think, is a very important aspect too, is that no matter what, there's a resource out there that could potentially help, or at least a branching off point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can see something, you're like, only maybe partial would work for me, but we can see and navigate and meld and like see what's going to work together for your own approach. So I think that's super important to remember too.
You are so brilliant for such a young person, I have to say.
Oh, well, thank you. I've read some good books, so as I have one here, but
Oh, thanks.
yeah, no, I appreciate that. I've been given a good opportunity in my role here and attended a lot of good webinars on like mental health and addictions. So I myself am not a clinician, so I'm able to kind of understand a little bit of the science behind things just merely through interviewing people, and it's been great. I've learned so much throughout my role, and I'm very, very happy that I get this opportunity and that we're able to kind of destigmatize the conversation in that sense, right? So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah. And then we do have a couple of questions about the recording of this webinar. It will be available as a follow-up resource for next week as our email, and will be on our website, ehncanada.com, under our resources page. So sit back and enjoy, and then you can enjoy at a later date as well. Then we do have some questions. You kind of alluded to this too, speaking to your daughter's past trauma with hospitals. But do you think some of the struggles, or this could be just a broad statement too, some struggles within patients are based on environment or through genetics? Or do you think it's kind of both?
Oh, I think I'm not a clinician. I'll jump in there and say that. You know, I do have my master's in education and a lot of other, assisted suicide training and all those kinds of things, but I'm not a clinician. Although if I ever, the question, if you go back and do a different career, I would love to have carried on with my undergrad in psych and become a practicing psychologist, but I digress. I think it's both. And it is my daughter herself who is trying to identify, because I mean, my husband was a police officer. I was an educator. We traveled with our children. We inspired our children. We did family dinners together. We did everything the best that we possibly could, given our circuit. They were involved in extracurricular. She was an athlete, all these kinds of things. And yet we still got to a point in her life where we were fearful of losing her. And so she actually wrote a piece when she was in grade 3 about something that happened to her when she was 2 years old. And it was traumatic for me at the time. I do think these individual situations, it's hard when you think, oh, a 2-year-old, oh, wow, I was there. I held her. I hugged her. I did all, we got home. But what happens in their brains to pull all that in as a traumatic experience at such a young age, I don't understand that. The clinicians here do. But very briefly, it was she was having trouble breathing. She'd had breathing troubles in the past. I took her to the local hospital in Leamington. They wanted to put her in an ambulance to Windsor with another child, and that mom didn't have a ride. I ended up in a car. They got to the hospital long before my husband and I could get there. And when I got there, she was just hysterical. And they were trying to put in an IV. And so I held her to help them put the IV, and they actually took her from my arms and into another room and blocked her arm to put the IV in. And when she came back to me in my arms, it was, oh my gosh, my husband. You wouldn't want to be on that floor when he arrived. And I could have done things so much differently as a parent, but you're in that moment and you're thinking, okay, I'm in the hospital. This is the best thing. But the trauma, I think, from that one event was only one piece. And then there were other hospitalizations and having to use puffers and when to know how to use puffers. I think it's all part and parcel for it. She's had other experiences that have caused her some trauma, which she can now identify, which is a really huge piece, right? And because when we hold that inside of ourselves, it just feeds that worry. It feeds that anxiety is the way she would describe it today. So I think there are incidents that if we can go back in time, and as people, we can do that individually, right? I can go back and have my regrets and my guilt as a mom for things that happened over a period of time, but it's not going to get us anywhere. It's not going to change what happened. So all we can do, I think, is to instill upon them, you got to go back. You got to go back and try to identify what possible triggers were, and then is that something that we can resolve and now live with and say, okay, I've learned from that and it's not going to happen again. I mean, she had to use, whenever we had to get blood from her, she had to use a butterfly needle because she was terrified of needles. Mm-hmm. So there are indications that those experiences when she was very, very young certainly contributed to her anxiousness and her anxiety as she got older. So you're back to your question. It's there's no hereditary component in my family, but I mean, certainly anyone on this call would know there absolutely is hereditary components for different situations and diagnoses. But I think it's both or one or the other. And it's tough. So I say now, Jeremy, I try to help parents to become more aware of signs in younger children, because I think part of the problem we have, it's not a problem because it's a reality and we have to do it. We're all here with resources, crisis lines when people are getting close to the edge, but we got to go back and get to kids when they're 4 and 5 years old, when they're little people. We have to teach them how to not only understand their emotions, but ways that they can get around frustration and anger. My niece is a social worker, and she and I are writing a children's book series, but that's only one piece. There's a lady named Jackie Simmons who's just done a TEDx talk. And people could research this. Clinicians, please look into it. It's research based, it's validated, where there are 4 questions we should be asking our kids as young as 12 years old. And when we can make it a natural part of our conversation, we can then identify when they're maybe getting up to that level where not yet crisis, but we've got to do some intervention here. And we stop people from getting so close to that ledge that we're going over with them. I think we have to be more proactive, and we have to make proactive the most important thing. Because I mean, look at how many people are here in this webinar. And I mean, the stats say it with Canadian Mental Health Association, Center for Mental Health, you as well. We can talk about the pandemic. Absolutely. That's one of the causes. But 40% of us in that survey that was done by the Center of Addictions and Mental Health during the pandemic are saying that our mental health has decreased significantly over the course of this time. So, and okay, I shouldn't even said the pandemic, because we are, who would expect? Now we are reactive. But I think there's
Yeah.
a lot of ways we got to go back and be proactive and open up those conversations and make them as natural. You said about talking, I say about like talking about a headache. How are you feeling today? Let's talk about our mental health. Why be embarrassed if we're having one of those down days? I'm in one of those days. I'm in one of those days. This is what I'm going to do to try to get through it. You want to help me out? Let's go for a walk. Natural conversations and being proactive.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And working at obviously like a mental health focused facility, it's very destigmatized within our organization or working environment, which is strange because like I work in a marketing environment and I've worked in several marketing environments as well, but it's never really a topic where you're talking about your mental health or anything like that. If you're taking a sick day, you're taking a sick day. But like at our organization, especially in our department, we'll be like, you know what, like I'm just not quite feeling myself today. I'm just going to take the day off and whatever. Nobody really questions it. They say, we're here if you need us, like, let us know kind of thing. But it's so important to kind of just, yeah, normalize the conversation and just to integrate it into every day. Because if I said, oh, I have a migraine, people would offer the same resources. People would say like, oh, if you need anything, like, let us know. But it's the same thing. Like, I'm not at a very like severe end rate at this moment. I'm just not feeling like myself today. And I think work would potentially like put me over. So I just need the day for myself. And then people are just like, okay, great. Like if you need anything, like let us know. So it's great to have that kind of stuff and to have that as like a resource.
And I think if I put on my educator hat now, oh my goodness, we've done so many, webinars, professional development days, understanding mental health, mental illness as educators for our children. But wouldn't it be wonderful? Okay, I can dream. Wouldn't it be wonderful if every single classroom across our province, across our country, did a mindfulness activity every single day? Because it's not only great for our students, it's great for our staff too. Our staff are so stressed right now. I talk about educators, but let's just talk about the whole gamut, right? And educators who are responsible for the health and safety of those little people in front of them. I mean, I have principals right now, principal friends that are, I mean, the amount of responsibility that they're wearing right now is quite daunting. So just imagine, and I don't know if that means training educators to do simple activities, 5-minute activities, what that looks like. We're certainly not going to have people flying into classrooms every day to do it, but I think it's possible. And I think then we start to teach people. There's yoga happening in kindergarten classrooms, but that's here and there. It's not a strategy that's being used across the province. I think it would just be brilliant. It would help all of us to become healthier emotionally and physically as whole beings. Yeah.
I definitely agree. And like, even I remember back in like my elementary and secondary days when we had daily physical activity,
Yeah.
right? Like we had like a dedicated time of our day where we would do jumping jacks in the classroom. We would do like whatever to like make sure we were getting our heart rates up and to be active. But why don't we do that for our mental health as well?
It was mandated
Hmm.
20 minutes a day of daily physical activity. So
Hmm.
if you had gym class, you had gym class, but this was in the classroom. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. Let's go
Yeah.
to let's go up to the Ministry of Education
We'll
and
just
talk
send
to
them a link to
Mr.
the
Luncheon.
webinar. It'll be great. Yeah. But like you said, that is a perfect world. And hopefully we do get to that point one day where mindfulness is like mandated and like trained for teachers or for any type of educator to incorporate it into their classes. as you mentioned too, a lot are incorporating it in and on their own and seeing that there's YouTube resources for like kindergarten yoga, or there's even like painting where you can have
Yeah.
that type of like engagement. But I agree. I think it should definitely become something that's more normalized. And then at a younger age too, it's just inherent at that point where it's just something that you're used to. So
Yep.
why not do a mindfulness check-in? Like,
And let's take it one step further. So just imagine those children going home and then teaching their families. Because let's be
love
real. I
that.
mean, the possibility of this happening in every single family is, there are families that are absolutely doing it, but, every child's mandated to go to school, right? And you
Hmm.
start to bring those things home. What happened in school today? Oh, let me show you.
Yeah.
I mean,
We
oh,
did this
wow. We can,
mindfulness check-in. Let's do it
yeah,
after dinner kind of thing. Yeah.
I
And
love
I
it.
think it would be great. Yeah. But like you said, that's hopefully not a far-fetched dream, but hopefully something that can be integrated soon.
We can drop the
Um,
idea. We
yeah,
can, we
definitely
can,
we
yeah,
can. And that's
yeah.
why we have forums like this, right? Is to brainstorm. So to have those type of ideas and hopefully the right person hears something and brings it forward.
Hmm.
Okay, so then we have more questions. Like this one's more of a circumstance. So I'm dealing with my brother's addiction to alcohol, following in our dad's footsteps, who drank himself to death. We're struggling with how to have the conversation that we believe he needs help. What are suggestions for how to go about this?
Okay, so without a clinician hat, okay. Um, the first question I would have is, do you have a relationship of trust
Mhm.
with your brother? Right? Because that's not always the case. Oh, wow, this is a tough one. I think it's the conversation. I'm worried about you. I'm concerned about you. These are the things that I'm seeing happening. And then wait for a response. In person, of course, not this virtual thing, not in person, whatever that looks like. And stay there and use the words, I'm here for you. I love you. We're going to help you get through this. And you're not alone is overused in some ways, but it's so, so important to say in a situation like this, because then when you leave they have someone to contact.
For
and
sure.
and I don't know the circumstances, but it could very well be that that person is alienated all of the people in their lives. I have no idea. And if there's nobody there left for him, you could be that individual person that opens up the doors. And the other piece is just to be ready for, get out of here. I don't want you around, because they've made a decision.
Mhm.
I interviewed Michelle Stein, if this will help. Michelle Stein came onto my podcast and disclosed publicly for the very, very first time that she was an alcoholic. Her 5 siblings were alcoholics because of a whole history with her parents. All 5 siblings have passed on due to circumstances around that alcoholism, and she has come out of it and she's speaking about it now. She's helping people to that might be a person, and if you go to my podcast you can look up the contact notes and reach out to her. She's right here in Leamington, Ontario. So I can't answer that specific question, but someone who's lived it probably could. And that's the first person who came to mind. She and I speak frequently. She's an incredibly wonderful person who does equine therapy with horses as well.
Oh, awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's really
all
cool.
kinds of different possibilities, right? So I'm
For
sorry that
sure.
you're going through that, whoever you are. But you got to know that you can be there with love and hope and support. But he's making his own choices.
I think what you said
Mm.
too about the in-person aspect is really important because a lot of us, like, if there is a conversation that we necessarily don't want to have or we know is going to be a little bit awkward or a little bit like you don't want to be confronting somebody and like
Yeah.
create that hostility. I think sometimes we rely on technology for those types of things, right? Where we're like, you know what, for myself, it would just be easier if I send a quick text or something like that. But to realize the severity and heaviness of this topic, like to do it in person is to do it justice, right? Is to realize that it needs to be that type of body language where they're able to read your energy, that you are coming from a welcoming, loving place,
Hmm.
and that it's not like, what the hell's going on kind of thing. Like, it's more like, I'm genuinely concerned about you. And it reads on your face, it reads through your body language, your tone, and everything that is not included within a digital means of conversation, right? So
Right.
I think that's a great, obviously everything you said was a great tip, but I think it's something that might often be overlooked is that the digital conversation might not be as beneficial as the in-person conversation.
Well, and the other piece to that is when you're there with your eyes and your ears and all of your senses, you can pick up on things and you can see because there's situations, and anybody who's had these suicide prevention training knows that there's a time when you're not leaving,
Hmm.
when you're going to make sure that there's a safe person coming in to be with them, or you're calling a crisis line, or you're taking them to a walk-in center, or you're calling an ambulance if they
Yep.
refuse to go. So the in-person thing, absolutely. And it's just COVID has just made it so complicated. So then they ask a question: if someone's not vaccinated and you are vaccinated, do you feel like you're safe going in person? I mean, there's all those complications that make this so much more challenging than it ever was before. But if tech is your only way to do it, then it's your only way to do it. But at least it's a way. It's not the best way, but at least it's a way.
Yeah, I agree. And then going back to the mindfulness that we spoke about previously, we do have a comment saying when we lived internationally, mindfulness was part of our every class at school every morning, 20 minutes.
Oh,
So
what
that's great.
country? What
Yeah, I
country
would
was
love
that?
to know that country. If you would like to put in the chat box what country. But yeah, that's great. Yeah, so hopefully we
Oh,
can adopt those and move forward with that. And then there's a
brilliant.
lot of recommendations within the chat box as well, which is great too, because the chat box is kind of acting as a support network in itself, where,
Excellent.
yeah, people are posting a lot of different organizations or a lot of different helplines or stuff like that. So I think that's super important. And then a lot more just about navigating conversations. So how this one's more specific to someone who's in treatment already. And again, obviously recognizing you don't have the clinician hat to put on, but I think it's more so just providing the steps that you've kind of touched upon already and maybe expanding on them. So how to navigate the conversation with a person who was in the treatment, but still is not open and honest with their caregiver and ignoring their caregiver.
Well, I think you have to do some deep digging to ask yourself why.
Mhm.
So if you were a caregiver like I was, it's pretty clear why she wasn't talking to me. It's pretty clear why she was keeping it all inside for that period of time. Um, and so if someone's not disclosing it, they have their own reasons for that, and I think we have to respect it. Certainly doesn't mean that we can't, you know, try to open up that conversation by and not questions. How did your treatment sent? How did your counseling session today? What recommendations did they make for you? I mean, that's not if they're not already disclosing things. It's simply I'm glad to see that you went to your session today. End of it. That's it. You're just validating. I would just validate. I'd go back to that. What are they doing well? That positive reinforcement, and then maybe that trust and it's not necessarily about trust. It could be that they're not sure. They're trying to figure out something. How can they talk to you if they haven't figured it out for themselves yet, right? So they could just be in a process where they're going through some things and they're working through whatever their clinician or whoever's told them to do, and they just need that time. So I would say take a step back and saying I want to know, and just try to build that bridge, that gap, and do some real deep personal reflection.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's great advice. And then we do have a response about the international mindfulness. It was Vietnam and Malaysia.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Well,
and then sorry, go
and I
ahead.
won't get into politics, but there was a time when we had an international organization of advisors to our Minister of Education, and we made great gains in Ontario. Ontario, I can't speak to the other provinces, only here for that. And I do welcome the time that we get back into that and learn from people who've done things so well before us. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Jeepers. So
For sure. And then hitting a little bit closer to home as well, someone mentioned they are doing mindfulness in a lot of Kingston schools. My grandson goes to school in Kingston and is in JK.
that is
So
wonderful. That
yeah,
is
that's great
wonderful.
to
But
hear.
let's go back to what you said a little while ago, though, Jeremy, about it was mandated for every publicly funded school board to do 20 minutes of DPA,
Mhm.
daily physical activity. So right now, boards are making the decisions themselves. That's very much what's been happening over the last 5 years or so, as opposed to the ministry saying, we believe so much in the mental health of our students and our staff that we're now going to mandate 10 minutes of mindfulness activities every single day and then give people the tools that they need to do that. Um, It's wonderful. Kingston, thank you very much for doing that. And I'm sure that's happening across our country, here and there and here and there. But why not make it mandatory?
Mhm.
Mandatory.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's hopefully we'll get to that point, but like you said, it's happening. So why is it not being instilled in every single school, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a very important trajectory. Hopefully we'll get on. And then to kind of wrap things up, since it is getting into the holiday season, how do we offer support to a family member during the holidays? And if they are not being included necessarily within the holiday celebrations due to their past, like with risky behaviors?
Whoa.
It's a big question.
It's a big question. I guess I would say, okay, and there's lots of reasons why people are not included in family celebrations, and those decisions are not usually yours alone to make, right? That makes it even more complex.
Mhm.
And the other piece, are they vaccinated? Are they vaccinated? Do we do
Yep.
this? Oh, that just makes it much more complex. But okay, so if they're not going to be able to come to a family function, and I'm just going in my own hat with my own family, and we've got a really challenging time coming up, and we've all agreed. I'm blessed to have siblings that we kind of work things out together. We're not confrontational. It's just been instilled in us with our mother, but that's not the case in many, many families. So you as an individual can only control your actions, your behavior, right? Your words. What can you as an individual, or your little context of your family, not little, you know what I mean? Your family, if that's part of what, that you could be there for them. Can you invite them to your home on a different day? Can you go and visit them with a basket of food on a different day? Can you meet them at a park, at a restaurant, at a whatever, so they still know that someone is there and someone cares? And I'm not suggesting you ever put yourself in risk, because we do have those situations, right? So, and that's a really precarious one. If someone's behavior is going to put you at risk, I guess there's places that you can lessen the possibility of that happening. A public restaurant might be one. I don't know. See, I don't know your context, but I guess I would say you can't control the decision of the larger group, but you can control what you decide to do or not do for that individual. It might be sending them a parcel, might be sending them a goodie basket with a card and a phone call to follow up if you can't
Mhm.
actually physically be there. Candygrams. I don't know. Just
No, no, no. I think those are great ideas too, because like you said, you don't want to put yourself into a situation that you're going to potentially be harmed. So
yes,
I think like even the mere thought of a parcel or a text or a phone call or something like that, just to let them know that you're thinking about them this holiday season,
yeah.
that goes so far and people don't realize that.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you get a text, like just say, "Hey, was thinking about you. Hope you have a great holiday season," something like that. That can hit so far for some people. And I think it's often overlooked the power that just a little acknowledgement can go.
That you could be the person that stops them from going over the edge, just because of that.
But
Just because
literally, they get
one
a text. Yeah.
one person cares.
Yeah. Because they see a text, they're like, "Oh, well, I really don't want to, like, Lynn thought of me today," kind of thing, and I don't want to, yeah, you know what? I'm okay today, kind of thing. Or like
Yeah,
it's a much different like situation, and people don't realize the weight that that holds. So I think
exactly.
that's very, very sound advice, and I think that's great.
This is really tough, everybody, just so you know, being put on the spot and having to think that way. Like, whoa, right on the spot.
Yeah,
Okay.
it doesn't matter
Probably
how
after
much
the
it,
fact, it's going to be, oh, shucks, I should have said this. And oh, that's
but
okay.
that's okay. That's okay, right? That's why they need to read the book, but and tune into the
Well,
podcast and stuff
it's
like that
one
too. So,
tiny little piece. There's
of
so
course.
many resources out there through webinars like this, and
Hmm.
podcasts now, and recordings. And I mean, if people aren't ready to actually go and talk to someone, there's documents you can download to start to learn for yourself. And that's the other piece I want to say, Jeremy, is even if it isn't affecting you, and everybody who's on this call for the reason, but if you know someone that mental illness isn't affecting at all, it's going to at some point in their life. So why not start reading and educating ourselves right now, and starting to enter into the conversations to make it more natural, so that when it does happen, you have some information. I
Yep.
would have been, I can't, I mean, I couldn't predict this was going to happen to me and my family, but I guess if, and you know what's interesting, I have to say this too. I could tell you what to do as an educator. I could talk to parents. I could give them that advice. But when it was in my own home and with my own daughter, it's almost like the door, I felt like, whoa, 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 this is very, very different, because it's the emotional piece and all of those, the heart, all of it that is there, that just, they're two very different beasts.
For
They
sure.
really are. Yeah.
For sure. Well, that brings us to our conclusion. Lynn, honestly, I'm going to echo what everybody's saying in the convo in the box and saying that they're so thankful for your honesty, for your transparency, and for your vulnerability throughout this whole presentation. And as like the presenter too, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking so openly about everything and for being so receptive towards this subject. I know it's something that a lot of people have trouble navigating and that people are interested in wanting to know more about. So people like you speaking out is integral for that to happen.
Thank you. And will you share the resource links that everybody's giving as well,
Yes,
Jeremy? Because
yes,
I'm always updating my information. So,
yes. I will
okay.
send those your way for sure. And then I will plug all of your information as well in the follow-up email. So Lynn, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you for future webinars as well.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate
And
it. Thanks,
for
Jeremy.
everybody who attended today, we will be sending a follow-up email sometime mid to late next week that will include all of the follow-up resources, a copy of today's recording, as well as any additional resources mentioned by Lynn throughout today's presentation. And then our next upcoming event is on December 16th. We are doing Fierce and Sober, an EHN holiday drag extravaganza. You should have received a teaser invite today. We had the pleasure of interviewing 6 sober drag performers throughout Canada about their experience with sobriety and navigating recovery, specifically during the holiday season. And we will be also including some lively performances by the drag artists. So tune in to that on December 16th and look out for more information. We hope to see you at future webinars. Take care.